Have you ever felt like Christians speak a different language? I think we have some common words and common phrases that tend to be foreign to someone that's outside of the church bubble. But do we who use them maybe in church have a solid understanding or appreciation for what they mean? We hope that you'll keep joining us for this series that we've called Christianese Translated, where we are unlocking the rich meaning behind a few of these terms. And today's topic is grace. It was the number one choice by vote on the Christchurch News WhatsApp group. Now, if you're not in that group and you want to be, let me know afterwards. But this is definitely a Christianese word. It's used in Christian circles and Christian contexts. I grew up going to a Grace church. And then I went to Grace College and Grace Theological Seminary. Lots of grace. I didn't look it up, but I would bet that grace is the number one most common word chosen for the name of a church or a Christian organization. And in English, at least in my culture, Christianese has certainly influenced little phrases, little expressions like goodness gracious, right? And to say grace before a meal, that's a stereotypical way of saying let's thank God for the food. But then we also have the phrase to be in someone's good graces, which is to find favor in the eyes of someone important, like to be on the teacher's good side or on their good list. Your status with them is good. You're pleasing to them, at least for now, which means positive treatment for you. So we're seeing goodness and gratefulness and favor, like pleasing someone. And then in Spanish, I know it's English Sunday, but I think we can all recognize that to say thank you, we say gracias. Literally, graces. Now that's something that even Spanish speakers, native Spanish speakers, may not notice until a gringo points that out. We're saying graces. And in Uruguay, which is the least religious country in all of Latin America, I always notice that on my tickets to park at the airport or in the mall, it says tiempo de gracia, usually 10 minutes. Time of grace or a grace period. Maybe you've seen that. Now, when I was living on campus at Grace College, the first year students had a curfew. We had to be in the dorms by midnight. But we famously had a grace period, just like this, 10 minutes. So we could make it in by 12:05 or 12:10, and we'd be safe. We'd have the grace of no consequences. But then in Spanish, we have phrases like tener gracia. Like if someone tiene gracia, they have grace, they're pleasant, they're pleasing. This is a fun person. They have an ability to be easily liked. Something that no tiene gracia, doesn't have grace, is displeasing and boring. But then gracioso means funny for some reason, instead of gracious. And me da gracia, it gives me grace, means it makes me want to laugh. Doesn't really make that much sense. But something that does make sense, I don't know if you realize this, but gratis, free, comes from the word gracia, grace. Just like gratitude, gratis, gratitude. These are all part of the same family. Because in Spanish, de gracia is free. It's on the house. That makes sense when we consider how the Bible uses grace. If you take nothing else away from today, I hope that you can always remember this basic definition of grace. Grace is undeserved kindness or unmerited goodness. It's a free gift. It's often paired with mercy, which is to not give something bad that someone does deserve, like to withhold a punishment. So mercy is not giving something bad that they do deserve, and grace is actually giving something good that they don't deserve. And the Greek word for grace in the New Testament is charis, or charis. And from that they get their word charisma, which is gift. So that's why whenever we speak of grace, we're speaking of a free gift, unearned and undeserved. That's why we have this well-known verse. For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith. And this not from yourselves. It's the gift of God. It's not by works, so that no one can boast. Well, that's it. We came here to learn what grace is, and I think we got it. So we can go home. You can still go home if you want to, but there's more. Since we're talking about languages, I think it's interesting to point out that God chose, I think very intentionally, he chose to communicate his word originally in two main languages, Hebrew in the Old Testament and Greek in the New. And the thing about Hebrew and Greek is that one word is capable of being packed with many layers of depth and many layers of rich meaning, even more than English and Spanish can really capture or translate. But even in these English and Spanish phrases, we've already seen quite a range. We have free goodness, gratefulness, and giving someone joy. And when I started digging a little further into how grace is used in the Bible, I realized that free gift is really only the tip of the iceberg. And now last week, Roger used the analogy of the iceberg. But for today, I prefer ice cream. Because since we're talking about gifts, I'd much rather receive ice cream than iceberg. You can give me ice cream today, and that would be grace, because I don't deserve it. But when you dig down into grace, one of the most frequent and most important words in all of Scripture, you realize there's way more depth. There are way more layers than we thought. There are at least 3 layers or scoops or flavors of grace. And where I come from, there's an ice cream chain called Cold Stone Creamery. And their sizes, instead of the typical small, medium, large, or 1 scoop, 2 scoop, and 3 scoops, their sizes are famously like it, love it, and gotta have it. Like it, love it, and gotta have it. And today, I want to scratch the surface of the 3 layers of grace, or the 3 scoops, or the 3 flavors, if you will. The first is the grace of life, like it. The second is the grace of salvation, love it. And the final one is the grace of delight, gotta have it. And each layer of grace is a gift, right? And each gift comes with something. You know, a lot of toys say on the box, batteries not included, which is kind of lame. That's not the case with grace. Imagine you get an Xbox for Christmas, and it comes with the power cable, of course, but then it also includes headphones for the peace of the rest of the house. And on top of all of that, it even comes with a gift card to the store to buy a game. That is quite a bundle. That's grace. Because the first layer of grace, the grace of life, also called common grace, is the goodness or the kindness or the blessings that Gail was talking about that all people enjoy just being alive on this earth, whether they like God or not. Goodness, gracious. This grace gift comes with provision. It comes with provision. Everything good we receive is God's grace. And the Apostle Paul said in Acts to a group of people who were by no means Christians, he said God has not left himself without testimony. He has shown kindness, grace, by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and even fills your hearts with joy. And he's echoing what Jesus said. Jesus said the Father causes his Son to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. This grace is free. Whether you're good or not, whether you follow God or not, everything necessary for life, every breath, every function of our bodies is grace. The sun and all its effects, sustenance and the mechanisms of digestion, water and sleep. And Paul said, even joys. Why do we have joys? The joy of tasting our favorite pizza. The awe of seeing beautiful mountains. The exhilaration of smelling your spouse's perfume. And the impact of hearing someone giving you a compliment. The feeling of fulfillment that we get after a job well done. That is grace. The grace of life. But again in Acts, Paul reveals that the purpose of this grace of life is to lead us to dig deeper to find the next layer of grace. He said, the God who made the world himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. In him we live and move and have our being. But God did this so that we would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. So the second layer of grace is the grace of salvation. The grace of salvation. Now, out of all of the biblical writers, it may not surprise you that this Apostle Paul is the one who uses grace the most. And I knew going into this that a lot of times he ended his letters with grace to you, and a lot of times he opened his letters with grace and peace to you. But little did I know, I found out that every single letter that Paul wrote ended with grace to you. And every single letter that Paul wrote began with grace and peace to you. I saw everyone, grace and peace, grace and peace, grace and peace. So just like a teenage boy and girl that start hanging out together, you start to think, something's up with these two. Something's up with grace and peace. Clearly, this gift of grace comes with peace. It's a bundle. And out of all of Paul's letters, grace appears in Romans the most. And if we zoom in just on this chapter, Romans 5, that Roger took us to last week and that we just read, we see that the chapter starts with, therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. So access to grace brings peace with God. But why do we need peace with God? Well, as Roger showed us last week, Romans 5 reminds us that starting with the first humans choosing to displease God and be his enemies by breaking his law, now we all inherit that penalty and we all inherit that nature that inclines us to choose for ourselves to displease God and be his enemies. We all fall short of the standard of God's goodness and thus earn a wage or earn the sentence of death, which is separation from God. And separation from God means separation from that grace of life that we were talking about. It's separation from that grace of life that God brings. Imagine for a moment this world, this life, without the steadying hand of God, where all provision and sustenance and goodness and kindness and peace and joy and love comes from. I don't think we can even fathom a world without those things. But a world without the presence and provision of God would be a terrible place to end up. But God doesn't want it to be this way, so he made a deal. In the Old Testament, which testament, by the way, means covenant or pact or contract. So in the Old Testament, God made a contract that when the people broke his law, being realistic, they could sacrifice an animal instead of paying with their own life. And that made peace with God. But these days we hear a lot about ceasefires. Don't worry, I'm not going to get into global politics. But since ceasefires are on our mind lately, it's a great way to understand the difference that Jesus made when he fulfilled the old contract and brought a new contract, the new covenant. Now, we know that a ceasefire is a great thing, and it's a hard thing to achieve. Leaders give a lot to make it happen. But ceasefires by nature are temporary. It's a pause. Ideally, they are in place to allow both sides to come together, to come to an agreement for lasting peace. Right? A lasting peace deal. Now, the animal sacrifices in God's first agreement with man established a ceasefire. But they have to keep making those sacrifices as they kept breaking the law. This established a temporary peace between God and his people. But it was always pointing toward the agreement for lasting peace. Now, the old provision always had grace. It was always grace. So when Jesus came along, it said, out of his fullness, we receive grace in place of grace already given. But this time, God himself paid the high cost for the lasting peace. The God-man became the ultimate sacrifice to end all sacrifices. And instead of just covering over sin, it wipes out past and present and future sins from our record. And this new deal, this new covenant, this new contract is that when we sign, when we accept him and believe him and commit to him, we receive lasting peace with God, not a ceasefire. That's why right now we are in what Christians call the age of grace, or the grace period. Remember the parking pass? The grace period. Tiempo de gracia. We're in that right now. See, in Romans 5 and the rest of the New Testament, we learn a lot about grace. We learn that it's free. We just read a whole chapter that calls it a gift. It's free, it's freedom, and we see that it's for all, it's forever, and it's overflowing. In other words, it's offered to everyone, and its effects don't wear off, and it never runs out, no matter how much we need it and use it. And if you're like me, it's a lot. But just like this parking pass, we need to learn to read the fine print. And it's true that grace is for all and forever and overflowing, but the grace period is for a limited time. It's a limited time offer. Like a rescuer dangling from a helicopter, reaching out to a man lost at sea. It's kind of now or never. Now here on this ticket, it says 10 minutes. The thing is, in this life, we don't know how long this age of grace is, this grace period is. How long do we have to accept him and believe him and commit to him? And whether it's till Jesus' return or till the end of your life, it could be 100 years or 10 years or 10 months or 10 minutes. And at the end of the grace period, if you didn't accept this free pass paid for you, you elect to pay yourself. I might think, I've got plenty of time to get right with God. But maybe that's not the case. I encourage you today to think about accepting this offer of grace and life and lasting peace with this God who loves you. But that leads us to this final layer of grace. And I have to admit, I got a little confused looking into grace because I knew it was an undeserved gift of goodness. But then charis, this word in Greek, is also the same word for thanks and gratitude, like in Spanish, gracias, in English, to say grace. And I even found that in the Old Testament and the New, grace is also used for finding favor in God's eyes, like being in his good graces, to be pleasing to him. And in Spanish, we still have this gracioso y me da gracia, making us laugh. It helps when we realize that this charis, grace, which can mean gift, it can mean gratitude or favor, it's related to chara. Charis, chara. Chara is joy. That's why this layer is called the grace of delight. It's finding favor in God's eyes, meaning you bring him joy. He delights in you and you delight in him. Gracioso y me da gracia, meaning funny, evolved from somebody having gracia, being charming and pleasant and bringing joy by just being who they were. But what's wild about God's grace is that he didn't save us because we were charming or pleasant or pretty good or kind of friends. Jesus didn't die for us because we were likable or that we were particularly pleasing to his eyes. I mean, he saw us without makeup and he still loves us. He saw that no one was good and that everyone was living as his enemies. And that's exactly when he decided to give his life for us, when we were at our worst. So when Jesus then gives us the challenge to give grace to our enemies, he's saying, follow my example. Be like me. I did it for you. But that's where Jesus confusingly uses this word charis in the sense of a reward. He said, what credit is it for you? That's the word charis. What charis is it for you if you love those who love you and do good to those who are good to you? Everyone does that. I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Give without expecting repayment. Then your reward will be great, and you will be like children of the Most High, because he is kind, gracious to the ungrateful, the uncharisful, I guess, and wicked. Be merciful, just as the Father is merciful. We can untangle the confusion of meanings with a little glimpse into the society that Jesus and Paul lived in. At that time, charis was tied to this gift-giving cycle, this vicious cycle of grace, if you will. One person would show favor, charis, grace, by giving an undeserved gift, an unearned gift. And the other responds with gratitude, charis, grace. Not based on earning or repaying because they couldn't, but based on honor and joy and a deepening relationship. And then the first person, pleased and overjoyed and delighted, charis, by that gratitude, then they naturally want to send more charis their way. And maybe in your culture, it's a lot like that. So the Bible shows that God's grace gift is given to those who cannot repay, and yet it calls us to live a grateful life in response, which involves living like him and becoming more like him, more like our Father. So we become like children of the Most High. It makes God happy and proud when our lives reflect his nature. And then God, delighting in us, wants to just give more reward, more charis to us. If you're a parent, doesn't it make you happy and proud when you see your kid displaying some positive trait that you know came from you? Doesn't it make you want to give them ice cream? Now, when comparing the grace of salvation layer with the grace of delight, we have to know that his love for us doesn't change, but we can absolutely please and displease him with how we live. Like a child with a good parent. As a parent, does your deep love change depending on your child's behavior? Do they stop being your child when they're misbehaving? I hope not. I'll find out soon. No. But they can certainly give joy or take joy away. They can displease or please you, and they can bring delight or grieve you. But once we've received saving grace, we should long for this next grace, the grace of delight. This cycle of delighting in him and him delighting in us. Gotta have it. That's this size. Gotta have it. We had like it, love it, and gotta have it. Our layers of grace. Sounds sweet, but it may sound impossible to do, and you would be right, at least with our own strength. Thankfully, this grace also comes with something. This grace comes with power. Power, that was the other word that I kept seeing pop up right next to grace all the time in the Bible. Just to name a few. The very first martyr, Stephen, was said to be a man full of grace and power. God said to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness." And Paul said, "By the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me." So yes, we're called to respond to this grace by delighting him, thanking him with our words and our actions and being more like him. But he gives us grace even for that. He gives us the power to please him. He gives us the grace to give him grace back. Like we still have to buy the game with that Xbox gift card, but God gave us the gift card. Not to mention the power cable and the headphones. We have this responsibility to do good with the grace given us, to delight him, but it's not on our own strength. So as we move into our time of communion, I just want to invite you to think about these three questions. Where do you need grace to bring peace in your life? Where do you need grace to bring peace to your life? Once you've received it from God, gift it to someone. Think about the crazy delight that God gets when we reflect his character in this most challenging but most beautiful way to show grace to someone who definitely doesn't deserve it. Someone that hurt us. Maybe even enemy. I want to challenge you to pray for that person that is coming to your mind where you say, "I just can't get over what they did." Pray for God to give you the power to bring peace where it makes no sense as far as it depends on you. And also, let's reflect on this question. Where do you need grace to bring provision in your life? Ask God for it. Pray for your needs and your desires, and in thanks, charis, pass it on to someone else. God loves it when we joyfully use our gifts, our resources, and when we joyfully use our gifts, abilities, to serve others. And where do you need grace to bring power in your life? Where do you need grace to bring power in your life? Ask God to give you the grace that you need to push through your current trial. Maybe it's something that's happening to you. Or maybe you need the power to resist some temptation to displease God. And then pass that grace along to someone else to help them get through and push through what they're going through with your presence. Who comes to mind?